I can make you one promise, and the whole point of this 5-Minute Friday is this. If you understand occlusion, and if you haven't taken a Roth course, or you haven't a Coyce or Spear, don't tell me you know occlusion. Just don't, okay? Unless you really have done, I'm talking hundreds of hours of diving into understanding the literature behind occlusion, you don't understand it. Hello there, orthopreneurs, and welcome to another episode of your 5-Minute Friday. I'm your host, Dr. Glenn Krieger. And you know, I recently did an interview, don't know if it's dropped yet, I think it has, with Bruce McFarlane. Great orthodontist, practices both in Canada and the US. And you know, the conversation turned into occlusion. And you know, I've spoken to Tom Pitts on the show, on Orthopreneurs podcast about occlusion. I've talked to Roncone about occlusion. Some of the greatest orthodontists you and I both know are into occlusion. And it's been made fun of in the past. And you know, one of the conversations I had with Bruce, which I'll bring up here a little bit in case you don't listen to the podcast, and we'll go a little bit deeper here, relates to the idea that, you know, I learned from the late, great Dr. Jerry Schultz. Great man, wonderful human being, one of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life. And I met him very late in his career. He sat at a lab bench in dental school next to P.K. Thomas. Yeah, the P.K. Thomas, as in the P.K. Thomas waxing instrument that we all had to use in dental school. Really one of the fathers of modern gnethology. Now, if you want to play that game and tell me that you learned from Lyle Johnson that articulators, you know, gnethology is the science of learning how articulators chew, you might turn this off now because you're going to miss some really important stuff. But it's an insulting comment that he made. Orthodontists tend to thumb their noses at occlusion. But I want to give you some quick examples of what Bruce and I spoke about. One of the side effects of using aligner therapy, especially in certain individuals, is posterior open bites. Minor, but they're there. And most of the time they'll settle. But as Jerry Schultz told me, you know, gnethology is useful to a very, very small group of people because the body is so adaptable in terms of what we do. If you've been treating ortho for more than a couple of years, you know how adaptable the stomatognathic system is. You know, things don't have to be perfect for people to function really, really well. But in that very small minority, those cases that are going to keep you up at night if you're a restorative dentist, the ones that are going to bother you in the anterior portion of the mouth, the ones where they keep opening up a space between their centrals, and yet when they wear the retainer, it closes, right? These are all occlusal-based issues that can easily be solved, that need to be looked at. When you leave somebody in a posterior open bite, yeah, they're probably going to settle just fine. But how do you decide whether or not they will or they won't? Right? The occlusion and all the things you learn along the way that they learned in the Roth course about facial types and occlusion, about the TM joint and how that functions. You know, the difference between having no posterior occlusion and no anterior occlusion is a massive difference on the whole musculature and joint, you know, the stomatognathic system as we call it, right? So there are big differences in one versus the other. Bruce now runs part of an occlusion course. John Coyce, Frank Spear, these are great occlusion courses that people should take. Because I can make you one promise, and the whole point of this 5-Minute Friday is this. If you understand occlusion, and if you haven't taken a Roth course, or you haven't a Coyce or Spear, don't tell me you know occlusion. Just don't, okay? Unless you really have done, I'm talking hundreds of hours of diving into understanding the literature behind occlusion, you don't understand it, right? If I were to ask you some very simple questions, you know, very simple questions that were asked of me before I started my training at University of Washington in gnethology. Simple question for you. If you're missing a cuspid, upper cuspid, where is it better to build lateral guidance off of? The bicuspid or the lateral? It's a very simple question if you understand this. Now, I'm not going to get into it here, but there's a real answer to that you'd better know because it plays a huge role in how the muscles function and what the long-term ramifications are to the teeth. So the whole point here isn't to say, I know occlusion and you don't. I had to know occlusion. When you're doing, you know, 8 upper implants and 6 lower implants and building an entire occlusion with no neuroception, right? They can't feel anything. You need to build that occlusion in such a way that they are protected and that the joint doesn't break down. You'd better know your occlusion. And again, that's why I did 3 years, quarterly meeting, 40 hours per quarter at University of Washington for 3 years. While I was practicing dentistry. So I learned this stuff, and there is stuff that I threw out, and there's stuff that is with me every single day. But once you understand occlusion, your life is going to change. If I were to say to you right now, I need you to make somebody a really well-made night guard, with a mutually protected occlusion. And I want you to be able to design it and make it so that we know for a fact this is going to solve their myofascial pain problems, not their TMJ problems. Maybe it does, but it's important for you to understand the difference between myofascial pain and TMJ pain. Because all too often, I have too many ortho friends of mine who the second somebody points at their joint, they refer it out. And that's not the way it should be at all, right? There's only one thing in my practice I refer out, and that's a degenerating joint. If the joint is degenerating or they can't open at all, like they really are opening 8 millimeters, this is over my head, right? There are better people than me to treat it for a whole variety of reasons. But again, short of those two things, maybe crepitus, if it's really bad crepitus that's impacting their function, maybe I'll refer that out. But otherwise, I treat everything else. And it's part of my treatment fee for ortho. And so learn your occlusion. That's the whole point of this. Take the course where you need to. I keep saying to people that one day I'm going to create an occlusion course, a 2-day functional occlusion course for orthodontists. Not there yet. It's a lot of work. It would be great to do because it would allow me to dive into the occlusion literature one more time. But I'll leave you with this. The NTI appliance has caused so many problems for us as orthodontists to solve later because GPs make the NTI appliance. So here's your homework. If you want to reach out to me on a DM, be my guest. I welcome these conversations. Number 1, what is the NTI appliance? Number 2, don't look this stuff up. Don't cheat, okay? Number 2, why is it called the NTI appliance? And what impact does that have in the literature, right? What impact, how do they develop it based on the literature that supports what they did? But more importantly, what's the number 1 reason why you end up seeing all the problems with the NTI appliance? And there's really 2 reasons, but any reasons you can give me would be great. Those are some very, very basic questions about occlusion that if you don't know the answer to it, you should learn about them because it'll be pretty cool. Anyway, much love to each and every one of you. I hope I'm going to see you at Summit. Go to opsummit2025.com. I promise we will not be talking about occlusion unless you come up to me and say, Glenn, I got a question about occlusion. And then we'll have some fun. Much love to all of you. Can't wait to see you at Summit and wishing you the best.